performed a preliminary report on the death of Nolan Xavier Wells. He conducted and presented this report on July 19, 2026. Preliminary report, second autopsy, death of Nolan Xavier Wells. Cause of death, undetermined, pending investigation. And we'll explain that as we go through the report this morning. The manner of death, undetermined, pending investigation. Statement of examination. This forensic pathologist was retained to perform a second autopsy examination on the body of Nolan Xavier Wells. Name of decedent, Nolan Xavier Wells, age 18 years old, race, black, gender, male. Date of death, unknown. Second autopsy date was performed on July 10th, 2026. Preliminary findings. And this is significant. Focal area of red discoloration in the soft tissue of the back of the head, the occipital region.
So we're going to stop there first because I did some research as well as we going through this autopsy with old Benjamin Crump there, who's having a difficult time pronouncing some of these words, just like I do sometimes. With that being said, I wanted to do some research on blunt trauma that's caused by waves. They did speak about, the high tides, the things that were actually going on in that area of Mississippi. And it is very apparent that some of these things can actually be done by the blunt force of high tides. And I want people to really understand the information that was found, right? Because we're going to ultimately see that the cause of death was still undetermined and pending further investigation. So there's no new news that we're getting here today, right? Like they went and took a body from Mississippi all the way to Washington, D.C., just to give us the same information that they previously gave us. So it's something to think about as you're receiving this information today. Some of the things that were identified, there was no skull fractures or major deep tissue trauma injuries that were identified during the independent examination. And this is also with sources of AP News. This actually was what was given out as well. And I will also give you guys some background later on about who the Dr. Mitchell is, because I wanted to do some research to see if he did any other notable cases. And I wouldn't say they're not noticeable, but he really is known for his police brutality and police cases in Washington, D.C. So I'll go over some of that later too.
He said the etiology is unknown at this time. He said the body was received after the initial autopsy. He said the body had marked decompensation. He said corona incision of the scalp, brain removal, Y-shaped incision of the anterior torso, and he talked about the organs being removed as is common.
So as you hear, there's people streaming in the background because, again, they didn't first educate everyone on what actually happens. I do have this in documentation that came from Dr. Roger Mitchell. He did explain to everybody that the removing of organs, even the one when it talks about the neck and then the certain organs in your throat area, that is normal, common practice when it comes to removing certain areas. Because it talks about here, it says Nolan Wells' case, the independent pathologist, Dr. Roger Mitchell, reported that the interior neck structure, the throat, were not present when performed the second autopsy. He wrote that retaining these structures is a common forensic pathology practice. But because it did not have them to examine, he could not fully assess whether a neck injury contributed to the death. So again, even though everything was not there, this is common practice. But when you don't educate people on what's actually going on, you get these emotional responses in the audience.
Accompanied in the body cavity. And that when you have an autopsy, the organs are removed from the body and they're dissected and examined. And then they're put back in a bag within inside the body. So when they're buried, their remains will all be with them. But in this occasion, if there's going to be a second autopsy, then the organs are put in the body cavity so the second pathologist could be able to examine the organs as well. Very significant for Dr. Mitchell was that the anterior inner neck structures were absent, not received with the body. And we'll explain that in just a minute.
And that's what I just explained to you guys. I actually gave you the words. You can actually look up his words if you need reference on New York Post. Dr. Mitchell actually provided all this evidence for you and why things weren't there. And I want to really point out something because these things are very important, right? We continue to talk about things like slavery and PTSD from those type of things. But we are now sitting in a room full of people who are not aware of what normally happens during an autopsy, and they're having these emotional reactions to things that could affect them long term.
And then it talks about the additional procedures performed during the second autopsy, and we'll go into the paragraphs on that there because he explains it better in his narrative. So where's the first page of that discussion? Not the diagram yet. Diagram on there. So he talks in the preliminary discussion opinion. This forensic pathologist identified several limitations during the second autopsy that create barriers to establishing a definitive cause and manner of death for Nolan Xavier Wells. And that's important. He talks about the fact that we didn't get to see the body when it was first recovered, like the medical examiner working for.
So I'm going to stop there. So this is some people deceiving people. And that's why I wanted to talk about this tonight, right? They knew this before the body was even sent to a whole nother state. Dr. Roger Mitchell knew what he was receiving prior to it coming there. Anybody who works in any medical field, it's like someone exchanging property or things when things are reported in a crime scene, right? You just don't send a body to another state and not know exactly what you're receiving. Because if I sent you over there with 2 legs and you come back with 1, I'm not gonna. I gotta have accountability for everything that you're receiving and everything that's leaving. So again, he's saying these things were very significant. They were very significant, but you were also aware of what you were going to be examining.
Mississippi would have seen. He talked about the second autopsy performed on Nolan Wells revealed marked decompensation or changes. Marked decompensation can obscure the presence and absence of bruising on the skin surface, especially during a second autopsy examination. What he's saying, because the body was so decomposed that you couldn't tell if there was bruises or abrasions on the body when he received it on the 10th of.
So why did you need to send the body somewhere else? How many days did it take for the body to decompose? Did you guys just not like that they said there were no signs of foul play? That's pretty much the same thing you're saying here. You're just using medical terms to make people develop a different narrative of it. But this is the same thing, right? He got a body that was unrecognizable, but you're trying to force evidence out of it.
July. For these reasons, additional dissection procedures not performed during the first autopsy examination were performed to rule out potential blunt force injuries responsible for the death. These procedures included facial dissection, posterior head and neck dissection, dissection of the ribs, the pelvic, dissection of the subcutaneous and deep soft tissue, dissection of the back, the buttocks, the arms, and legs. He did all of this to rule out things. He ruled out there were no fractures or deep tissue injuries identified. This was very important because he wanted to be very thorough and very transparent, because transparency is the key to getting to the answers of why Nolan Wells is not with us. So he did that there and was very straightforward, very open, very open. He says, however, dissection of the back of the head during the layered posterior neck dissection revealed a 12 by 8 inch focal area of red discoloration in the deep soft tissues overlaying the occipital bone. And he talked about how he found red discoloration when he cut open into the back of his head towards the occipital bone, and he saw the red.
So all of a sudden, Nolan body was at first, when Ben Crump first talked about it, it was so decomposed they couldn't prove deep bruising. Now he's going to a board to show you guys that they cut through something to see red bruising. So which one was it? Was certain areas not, like what was decomposed, what wasn't? You're cutting a body that's no longer alive and living. Like, these things can be very misconstrued. I would tell people to really be highly, read over it yourself. All the evidence is out there when it comes to what was going on. Again, I'm not saying that foul play wasn't there, but with the evidence we're receiving, we do not know. We do not know. And at this point, Colin Kaepernick, people are investing their money to fly a body around the country to receive the same outcome that Mississippi gave you days way before, July 6th, July 7th, that you're now getting later when you examine the body on the 10th. And then I'm not even sure if everybody was aware that they even examined the body 12 days ago. It's July the 22nd. Because when you think about all the press conferences that came out, it made it seem like everything was just now moving to the next location. So,
and we actually saw the pictures of it. It's significant. You can't help but notice, why is this dark red here in the back of his head? And so he was important to note that in his report. He said that etiology of this finding is unclear. There are no lacerations of the overlaying skin nor fractures of the underlying skull. These findings are inconclusive for perimortem injury due to both the extensive decomposition and the absence of associated injuries. This finding, however, is significant enough to be highlighted in this preliminary report for further investigation. It is important to reiterate that the finding could not have been observed in the first autopsy because the posterior head and neck dissection were not performed. He said another limitation faced by this forensic pathologist was the absence of the anterior internal neck structures. The trachea and the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone were not received with the body.
Now you hear everybody, They knew what parts they weren't receiving, guys. Like, they knew what they weren't getting. Like, I don't know how stupid we have to be sometimes.
So he's saying that the throat was not received with the body when he got Nolan Wells' body in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. And so let's discuss that with what he said about that. He said, it is assumed that the initial pathologist retained these structures for additional evaluation. He said the retention of the anterior neck structures during an initial autopsy is a common forensic pathology practice.
So it's coming. It's coming. So Dr. Rogers already knew what he might not be receiving with this body. Nothing that wasn't there was not something they didn't know. I would ask the question, why didn't you just send your independent pathologist down to Mississippi? Why move the body? Why not fly to the location that has everything you need? I'm sure doctors and pathologists do this all the time. I'll look it up for y'all just to make sure I'm correct.
He was chief medical examiner for 7 years in Washington, D.C., and he said that if they had concern about throat or any fracture or compression of the throat, they too would hold them back. He doesn't know why they held the throat back, but he said the throat was not with the body of Nolan Wells when he received it in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. He said, nevertheless, a posterior neck dissection performed without review.
So let me just read something to you all. So a pathologist can practice outside of a traditional pathology office, depending on their specialty, credentials, and the work they're performing. Some common examples include hospitals. Most pathologists work in hospital laboratories where they can examine tissue, blood, and other specimens. A medical examiner or coroner's office, academic institutions, a private laboratory. They can also do it field work. While uncommon for most pathologists, forensic pathologists may travel to death scenes, mass disaster sites, and human areas as part of the investigation. If you're asking about a forensic pathologist like Dr. Roger Mitchell, yes, a board-certified forensic pathologist can review autopsy reports prepared by another pathologist and can examine photos, tissues, and things of that nature. So, however, he cannot perform an autopsy remotely. So, if those items are very critical for Dr. Rogers to see, he could have flew from DC, which would have been cheaper than flying a body from Chicago to DC. So if these things are so pertinent and so important, why not bring yourself to those locations?
The interior neck structures is incomplete. Therefore, this pathologist cannot rule out injury to the neck as a contributor or a cause of death. He said he would need to have the medical examiner in Mississippi allow him to review the throat. That's why he said his autopsy is undetermined pending investigation. Remember, it's about transparency. Because the initial autopsy rightfully removed and dissected each organ, there are additional limitations inherent in the second autopsy of Nolan Wells. The most significant of the limitations was the inability to directly observe the airway and the lungs for water and directly observe the stomach for gastric contents. He said it is very significant as to what the initial forensic scientists who got to review the body when it was recovered. We have heard from our call center people saying the body wasn't waterlogged. Well, we need to know those things. But unfortunately, because the body was decomposed and the organs have already been dissected, those are things we can only get from the initial autopsy. So therefore, again, the manner and cause of death is undetermined until further investigation. We are hopeful that the Mississippi Medical Examiner would give Dr. Mitchell an opportunity to see their photographs and their observations to the condition of Nolan Wells' body closer in time to July 4th. That is very important.
So here on The Faceless Father, we're going to give you guys more transparent information that Crump likes to say. So did some research. It says in most cases, yes, when a body is sent to another state or facility for an independent examination, the receiving forensic pathologist usually knows the following: the identity of the deceased, unless the examination is intentionally blinded for research purposes, which it wasn't, why the body is being sent, the second autopsy, independent review, and family requests, the agency or person requesting the examination, and the relevant medical and investigative information that accompanies that body. So everything that was done in Mississippi, Dr. Rogers was going to receive when this body got to DC. It said also typical information that may accompany the body is identification information, a chain of custody documentation. As I mentioned, it's the same when you're on a crime scene, when you're moving things that are on a crime scene, everything has a chain of custody. So it's not like Dr. Rogers said, oh my God, he came no neck. No, he knew he didn't come in with no neck. He knew what he was getting. The request for examination, medical records if available, the law enforcement and investigative reports, the on-scene information, even images, CT scans and x-rays if they are available, and the original autopsy report if one has been performed. So Dr. Mitchell also was able to compare his pathology autopsy report to the Mississippi autopsy report. None of this stuff is like something they didn't know. And that's why you have to do your research, because if you only stick to what you're receiving from the masses and the media, you will be deceived.
We have to continue to demand transparency, President Johnson.
Got to demand that transparency. You're getting it right here.
In addition, the original toxicology results have not been received at the time of this report, and we continue to wait.
So you're waiting on toxicology reports for almost 4 weeks, but you're able to fly a body from state to state and bury the body, and you ain't got no toxicology report? I think you guys are trying not to let the public know what the toxicology report is, because as we're going to see later on in tonight's show, they all were drinking and they were underage drinking. You guys are trying to also not be as transparent so that, hey, if Mississippi said there was no evidence of foul play, and Dr. Rogers in DC said, hey, with the evidence I have received, there's no evidence of foul play that I can determine with what I have received. Now you are literally up to the grand jury to try to figure out, can you even possibly find anybody who's in charge or allegedly in charge of this losing of Nolan Wells? So
for the toxicology to come back, because again, that will be part of the investigation into Nolan Wells' autopsy by Dr. Mitchell. It is significant to know that there's many things that go into toxicology that only Dr. Mitchell will be able to opine upon, and medical experts can opine upon. And he feels the proper place to do that is before a grand jury in a courtroom.
So he's saying that because I got you guys the timeline of toxicology reports. So they typically take, they're in the right range. They typically take 2 to 8 weeks. A routine medical case will be 2 to 6 weeks. A complex homicide or suspicious death could take up to 12 weeks, which this might, but I think this one's going to take 2 to 6 months because it says cases requiring specialized testing. So I think, I'm going to assume Benjamin Crump wanted to put that in about the grand jury because he already knows that they're going to save everything they can until they get into a trial. So I think that's the biggest thing. It says they put for this manner of the Nolan Wells case, the preliminary report may state pending toxicology. After the toxicology results return, the case or manner of the death may be confirmed, or in some cases revised if the findings are materially affected in interpretation. So it can take 6 months. So I don't know how long we want to grieve or how long we want to make profit off of this young man's death, but it looked like it could be up to 6 months.
And so we would hope that the district attorney would present Dr. Mitchell before the grand jury as well. We want all relevant information to be heard by the grand jury. Lastly, in cases where a death has occurred in or around a body of water, Lastly, in cases where a death has occurred in or around a body of water with suspicion of drowning, it is important to confirm how that person entered the water. This is the crux of the matter. This information is especially important for those deaths of persons who can swim, as in the case with.
So there you have it, man. That's Benjamin Cricket Crump, who continues to market the deaths of other African Americans. I know everybody's not gonna enjoy my version of that. I know everybody